Welcome to the story. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and support me. The old house creaked in the wind as Jack stepped into the dimly lit hallway. The wood beneath his feet groaning as though it had been asleep for years. He paused, letting his eyes adjust to the gloom. The place smelled like dust and history, like old books left too long on a shelf, and the air felt heavy with secret. Lucy brushed past him, her face lit up with excitement, her wide eyes taking in every shadow and cobweb like they were invitations to an adventure. "Jack, look at this place," she exclaimed, her voice bouncing off the high ceiling. "It's like something out of a storybook." Jack wasn't so sure moving to this ancient countryside house felt more like a punishment than an adventure. Their parents had talked about needing a fresh start, something about work, and the need for peace and quiet. But to Jack, it just felt like they had been abandoned to a cold, creaky old mansion, miles away from anything remotely interesting. "It's settled," Jack replied, shrugging. "That's all." Ethan, who had been lagging behind, piped up, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "Old is one word for it. Haunted might be better. Did you see the attic? It's got spooky written all over it." Mia, the youngest, tugged at Jack's sleeve, her small fingers warm against the chill of the house. "Do you think there are ghosts here?" Her voice was barely a whisper, and Jack could see the wide-eyed excitement on her face. She was clearly hoping for a yes. "No ghosts," Jack said, giving her a reassuring smile. "Just old furniture and a lot of dust." But even as he said it, something about the house felt strange. There was an energy in the air, something he couldn't quite put his finger on, as if the walls themselves were watching them, waiting. Lucy darted ahead, her curiosity impossible to contain. "Come on, let's explore," she called back, her footsteps echoing through the empty hall. Jack sighed and followed, with Ethan and Maya trailing behind. They moved from room to room, discovering one oddity after another: ornate chairs covered in sheets, towering bookshelves filled with cracked leather volumes, and old oil paintings of stern-faced people who looked like they hadn't smiled in centuries. It was Lucy who found the wardrobe, tucked away in a forgotten corner of the attic. It was an enormous thing, taller than Jack and carved from dark, gleaming wood. Its doors were decorated with swirling patterns, vines and leaves that twisted around the edges as if they had grown naturally from the wood itself. The wardrobe stood out even in a house full of peculiar objects. "Look at this," Lucy said, running her fingers over the carvings. "It's beautiful." Ethan scoffed. "That's just a wardrobe. Big deal." But Lucy didn't seem to hear him. She was already pulling open the heavy doors, the wood groaning as if it hadn't been touched in years. Inside was nothing but rows of fur coats, their soft fabric swaying slightly as if disturbed by a breeze. "I bet this is where people used to hang their fancy clothes," Jack said, stepping forward. "Old houses always have things like this." But Lucy was already stepping inside, pushing past the coat. "There's some more," she called out, her voice muffled by the thick fabric. "It goes back really far." Jack felt a shiver run down his spine. "Lucy, come on, it's just a wardrobe." But Lucy didn't listen. She disappeared into the sea of fur, her footsteps fading into the distance. "Lucy," Jack called out, stepping closer. "This isn't fun." He pushed aside the coats and took a step inside, expecting to feel the solid back of the wardrobe. But instead, his hand met cold air. He pushed further, stepping all the way inside, and suddenly the air around him changed. The musty scent of the attic was gone, replaced by something crisp and sharp. He blinked, and the dim light of the attic gave way to something else entirely. Snow. Jack was standing in a forest, his breath visible in the freezing air. Snow covered the ground in a thick blanket, and tall, dark trees stretched up into the sky, their branches heavy with frost. He turned around, expecting to see the wardrobe behind him, but there was nothing there, just the forest stretching endlessly in every direction. "What? Where are we?" Ethan's voice came from behind him, shaky with confusion. He and Mia had followed, and now all four siblings stood in the middle of this strange frozen world. Lucy, of course, was grinning. "I told you it was magic." Before Jack could respond, a soft sound reached his ears, a rustling in the trees, like something moving through the snow. Instinctively, he stepped in front of his siblings, his heart racing. The noise grew louder, and suddenly, from behind a nearby tree, a figure emerged. It was a fox, but unlike any fox Jack had ever seen. It was larger, its fur a deep rich red, and its eyes gleamed with an intelligence that made Jack's breath catch. The fox tilted its head, studying them for a long moment before speaking. Newcomers, it said, its voice smooth and calm, you best come at a dangerous time. Jack's mind reeled a talking fox. Was this a dream? He glanced at his siblings, but they looked just as stunned as he felt. Where are we? Lucy asked, stepping forward, her voice filled with awe. This is Olivia, the fox replied, its eyes never leaving Jack's. A land that has been cursed by the Snow Queen, and if you re-hear, well, you may just be the ones we've been waiting for. Jack's mind raced as the fox continued to speak, its intelligent eyes scanning each of them. The Snow Queen has ruled Eria for many years, turning our land into an eternal winter. We've waited for someone to come, someone from beyond to break her curse. Lucy, her voice breathless with excitement, asked, how do we break the curse? The fox, as gleamed, there's an artifact, the Heart of Summer. It holds the power to end the Snow Queen's reign, but is locked away in her palace, guarded by creatures loyal to her. It will not be an easy journey. Ethan, ever the skeptic, crossed his arms, and you expect us to just go and steal this Heart of Summer? We just kid. The fox gaze hardened. You are not just children. The prophecy speaks of 4 outsiders, siblings who will come from a distant land to free Edia. You are those siblings. No. We're not anymore. He had never believed in magic or prophecies, but standing here in a world that shouldn't exist, facing a talking fox, he wasn't sure what to believe anymore. We can just do nothing, Mia said quietly, her wide eyes filled with determination. Met Jack's out. We have to help. Jack felt a pang of pride for his youngest sister. She was right. If they didn't try to stop this Snow Queen, who would? All right, Jack said, stepping forward. We'll do it. We'll find the Heart of Summer and end this winter. The fox nodded solemnly. Very well. Follow me. There are allies in this land who will help you. But beware, the Snow Queen knows you are here. Her creatures are already searching for you. As they began to follow the fox deeper into the forest, the snow crunching beneath their feet, Jack's mind buzzed with question. How had they ended up in this world? Could they really be the ones to defeat a queen who had cursed an entire land? And most importantly, how were they going to get home? The cold air bit at his skin, and he pulled his coat tighter around it. Lucy, however, seemed unfazed, her face glowing with excitement as she stared at the snow-covered tree. Ethan was still muttering under his breath, clearly unconvinced, while Maya walked quietly beside Jack, her small hand gripping his tightly. After what felt like hours, they reached a small clearing. At the center stood a tall, slender figure, half human, half goat. His fur-covered legs ended in hooves, and his upper body was clothed in a dark green tunic. His eyes, large and kind, twinkled as he saw the group approach. This is the Ron, the fox said. He is one of the few fawns who have resisted the Snow Queen's influence. He will guide you to the palace. Dear bowed slightly. It is an honor to meet you. We've been waiting for you for a long time. Lucy beamed. We'll do whatever it takes to help. Good, the Ron said, his voice warm, but first we must make haste. The Snow Queen's forces are already moving. The journey to her palace is long, and the way is treacherous. They set off again, with Theron leading the way. The landscape changed as they traveled, the forest giving way to icy plains and jagged mountains in the distance. Jack couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. Every now and then, he caught a glimpse of movement in the shadows, but when he turned, there was nothing there. Are we being followed? He asked the fox quietly. The fox's ears twitched. Yes, the Snow Queen's wolves are close. We must keep moving. Jack's heart raced. Wolves. He had never faced anything more dangerous than the neighbor's dog, and now they were being hunted by magical wolves in a land that shouldn't exist. Suddenly a howl pierced the air, sharp and chilling. The sound echoed across the plains, and Jack felt his blood turn to ice. The fox growls. Without hesitation, Jack grabbed Mia's hand and bolted after the other. The howls grew louder, and soon Jack could hear the pounding of paws on snow. He risked a glance over his shoulder and saw them, huge, white-furred wolves with glowing blue eyes, their breath freezing in the air as they sprinted toward them. Keep running, Jack shouted, pulling Mia along as fast as he could. The wolves were gaining on them, Jack's summer lungs burned with every breath, and his legs felt like they were made of lead. Just when he thought he couldn't run any further, stopped abruptly, turning to face the wolf. "Get behind me," the fawn shouted, his voice commanding. Jack didn't need to be told twice. He pushed Mia behind the run, and the rest of the group quickly followed. Theron raised his hands, and suddenly the ground beneath the wolves shifted. The snow melted away, revealing thick vines that shot up from the earth, wrapping around the wolves' legs and pulling them to the ground. The wolves snarled and snapped, trying to free themselves, but the vines held fast. But won't he hold them for long? Theron said, his voice tight. "We need to move." They ran again, this time with the howls of the trapped wolves fading into the distance. Jacksaw's heart was still pounding in his chest, and he knew they had barely escaped. As the hours passed, the group grew weary. The icy landscape stretched endlessly before them, and the temperature seemed to drop even further. Jack's muscles ached, and he could see the exhaustion in his siblings' faces. But there was no time to rest. The Snow Queen as palace was still far away, and the wolves would be back. They finally stopped at the edge of a frozen river, its surface a sheet of ice that glittered under the pale light of the distant sun. "We'll across here," Theron said, his voice low. "But be careful, the ice is thin in places." Jack stepped cautiously onto the ice, testing it with his foot. It creaked under his weight but held firm. One by one, the others followed, their footsteps hesitant on the slick surface. Halfway across, Jack heard a loud crack. He froze, his eyes darting to the source of the sound. A fissure had appeared in the ice, spiderwebbing out from beneath Ethan's feet. "Ethan, don't," he moved, Jack shouted. But it was too late. With a loud crack, the ice gave way beneath Ethan, and he plunged into the freezing water below. "Ethan," Jack cried, rushing toward the hole. He dropped to his knees and grabbed Ethan's arm, pulling with all his strength as Ethan gasped for breath, his face pale from the cold. For a moment, Jack thought he wouldn't be able to pull him out. But then with a final heave, Ethan broke free of the water and collapsed onto the ice, shivering violently. "We need to get him warm," Lucy said, her voice trembling with fear. Duran knelt beside Ethan, placing a hand on his chest. A soft glow emanated from his palm, and slowly Ethan, shivering, subsided. "He'll be all right," Franz said, "but we need to keep moving." They continued across the river, and by the time they reached the other side, Jack felt like his legs were going to give out. But they couldn't stop. The Snow Queen's palace was just beyond the mountains, and they were running out of time.